What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video. Today, as you can tell from the glowing red orbs around my character, we are going to be going over the tanks today. The DK tank, the tried and true staple behind every single trial group. It's basically built around the tank, and your success hinges on the success of the tank itself. So DK tanks are still the king of tanking in Murkmire. That has not changed too much, despite a couple of changes here and there that have affected tanks in general. But generally speaking, it's generally been buffing and not necessarily nerfs when it comes to tanks. So DKs are pretty much right where they have been, pretty much close to, if not at the top of the food chain when it comes to tanks. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attribute points, everything you need to know to kind of basically make this build yourself. We'll be going over several different gear combinations, as well as skill combinations, as well as, you know, when you want to use those different combinations. And we will obviously not be doing a rotation just because tanks don't really have a rotation. It's a very pro-action and reactionary kind of a role. So we don't really have a rotation, but I will kind of show you guys kind of the dual wield backbar, kind of how those enchants play out in combat, so you guys can get an idea of what the enchants situation is with dual wield on our backbar here. So getting things started first with our gear. So this has a lot of different options here, but I'm going to start off with basically what is going to be my default when it comes to tanking content, whether that's 4-man content or trials. So my default setup is going to be Lord Wardens as my monster helm set. So I have a light and medium piece here. So you do have several options when it comes to monster helms, so you don't have to run Lord Wardens, but it is generally considered to be the most kind of applicable in terms of content that you're running. So it's really good for 4-man, really good for trials, just because of the additional resistances that it gives you as well as everybody around you. So personally, I like to stick with Lord Wardens as my default monster helm set, but there are a couple of options that you can choose from. So the first option, alternative, is going to be Bloodspawn. So this is going to be focused in more on ulti generation. You generate 14 ultimate whenever you take damage, or you have a 6% chance, I should say, to generate 14 ultimate. And so this is really focused in more on getting as many Warhorns out as you possibly can. You will have lower average resistances if you're running Bloodspawn compared to Lord Wardens, so you do need to keep that in mind if you decide to go with this set. Another set that you might want to consider is going to be Thurvokun. Thurvokun is kind of arguably a little bit less useful than the other monster helm sets that we're going to be talking about, and that's mainly because of the minor maim that it applies. It's basically a very easy way to apply minor maim across a bunch of different enemies. So for trash pulls, this might be very useful to have here. Now, it is arguably not very useful on a DK because Dragonknights do have Dark Talons, which applies minor maim. And that is also an AoE minor maim. So there is some argument as to whether Thurvokun is actually good on a DK tank. I thought I'd include it here just in case you kind of wanted to play around with it a little bit. But for DKs, Dark Talons is a viable alternative to run if you want that AoE minor maim there. You can also go with Vykosa if you'd like. This is probably more for advanced tanks or tanks in progression style guilds, mainly because of the kind of precise timing that's required for Vykosa. So you have to be able to bash an enemy that is taunted within 3 seconds, basically to apply major maim to reduce the damage that you're going to take. So that does require some timing and kind of knowledge behind the fight mechanic. So example would be the warrior. You would basically have to know, okay, 1,000 cuts is coming, I need to bash now to get that major maim so I don't take as much damage. So that's one kind of downside of running Vykosa. The other obviously being you have to do Moonhunter Keep on Vet. And then the third one is that it's such a very, very long cooldown in terms of fights. So you have 15 seconds, and within those 15 seconds, the warrior can actually do 2,000 cuts. So you would only be able to do major maim for one, not necessarily a second one. So it's kind of an unreliable set, in my opinion, but it is a set that you might want to consider picking up as well. And it does seem like I forgot to grab one last set here, and that is going to be Earthgore. So Earthgore is very, very nice to have in certain scenarios, particularly in 4-man content, as well as in the mini trials. So that's Asylum and Cloud Rest for that burst heal that you get here. The downside is it does take a 35 seconds to completely get a new proc up, and it heals under 50% health, so you kind of have to meet that threshold there. But it's really, really nice for that additional burst heal when you need it. So I like to keep Earthgore on me, and I usually run it for Cloud Rest and Asylum, and sometimes for 4-man content as well, if we're running 3 DPS 1 healer, for example. So those are all your monster helm options here. So generally speaking, your monster helm will be 1 medium, 1 light. We are going with the 5-1-1 setup here. So most of the armor sets that you're going to be running are going to be only dropped in heavy in terms of armor weight, so you will need a medium and light for your monster helm if you decide to go 5-1-1. Otherwise, you could go something like 6-1 or 7-0, where you have 1 heavy or 2 heavy for your monster helm, so that's kind of up to you. There are certain trade-offs, so 5-1-1 and 6-1 will give you a little bit greater resource pool, but 7-0 will give you a little bit stronger heavy armor passive effects, so it's kind of up to you which one you want to decide to pick for. For our first armor set here, we're going to go with Ebon. Ebon is widely regarded to be the best group support set for tanks to wear. That's just because it provides your group, everybody in your group, with some additional health as long as they're within 28 meters of you. So that's really, really important for survivability. While it does say 11-18 max health on the tooltip, this is affected by passive, so this is closer to about a 1.6k increase in health, depending on the specific passives. So very, very powerful, very, very basically essential, I'd say, for progression style guilds for the additional health that it provides. Now, our second set here is going to be Alkosh. Alkosh is still the strongest, one of the strongest debuff sets in the game right now. It's very, very powerful for tanks. So you can get this from Mob Lakash. You will need the Thieves Guild DLC in order to get this set here. It is a medium armor set, so you will have to run jewelry and weapons. And it is so powerful because it reduces the resistances of any enemies you hit with the proc by 3010 for 10 seconds. So it's very, very nice. It does rely on being able to activate synergies, so it does rely on your healers and DPS being able to feed you synergies every 10 seconds. So you will need to have at least 2 synergies in order to get 100% uptime with Alkosh, and obviously the more synergies you have, the greater, the easier it is to get good uptime on Alkosh. So that's our jewelry, and then our weapons here. So we do have a sword and board on our front bar. This is pretty much an absolute must for tanks. And then we have a dual wield back bar. That's just because rending slashes or blood craze, depending on which morph you decide to pick, can proc both enchants on both hands while it is active. So we basically can have our 2 back bar enchants active at all times with a dual wield as our back bar here. Now, a couple of details before we go into set combinations, different sort of sets that you can wear to replace these. So for armor traits and enchants, you can basically go with any sort of enchants that you would like. So for instance, here I have prismatic enchants on my large pieces and health on my small pieces. That puts me at about 36k health and 20k magicka and stamina. But if you want some more stamina, by all means, you can replace one of these with the stamina enchant. If you need more health, you can replace it with a health enchant. You kind of have to play around with your attributes a little bit here. The most important thing is to make sure that your stamina pool is higher than your magicka pool, just because shards and orbs will return your highest resource pool between the two, so you always want it to return stamina and not magicka. We have sturdy on our small pieces with max health enchants. Again, you can use prismatic if you'd like. It's kind of up to you how you want to do with that. So some tanks like to run all sturdy on their armor pieces, and that's more of a personal preference. I prefer running infused on my large pieces, but there are some tanks that, again, prefer all sturdy for the additional block cost reduction. It's really up to you which one you want to pick. It's more of a personal preference choice. There's not one correct or one better combination of traits that you can run for your armor pieces. Now for jewelry, there's so many different combinations you can run, and a lot of it's going to be dependent on your personal style as well as the content that you're running. So I like to just stick with 3 shield play enchants. That's kind of my default, either 3 shield play or 2 shield play and run reduced feat cost, so that reduces stamina cost of my abilities. That's kind of my default go-to, but depending on your play style, you might want to replace this with reduced potion cooldown glyphs, for instance. So that's just something you're going to want to play around with personally. Your 3 main enchants that you're going to want to run, though, are going to be any combination of shield play, reduced feat cost, magicka regen, or this is 3, didn't I? There's actually 4 enchants. So shield play, reduce feat cost, magic regen, and reduce potion cooldown. Now in terms of traits, a lot like enchants, you have a lot of different options here depending on your personal play style. I have here 2 infused and 1 triune. You can go with 3 triune, you can go with 3 infused, you can go with 2 swift and 1 harmony, you can go with 3 harmony. There's a lot of tons of different options you can choose for enchants. So don't stick with what I have here, just play around with enchants and see, or traits I should say, and see what fits you. By default, I would say probably stick with 3 triune. That's kind of a very generic, very safe starting point. But as you kind of go into more content and kind of get a feel for what you need and what you don't, you can probably swap out those triunes with something else here. You can even go with healthy or robust if you just want pure stats. In terms of weapons and stuff, so every weapon you have should have infused. There is an argument for decisive on your front bar here if you have enchants on your back bar here, because rending slashes will remember whether it's infused or not. So there is an argument for a decisive front bar, but it's kind of up to you if you want decisive or infused for the stronger enchant option. I prefer just to stick with straight up infused, but if you want some more Warhorn uptime, then you can by all means go with a decisive front bar if you'd like. For our shields, again, a lot like with armor, sturdy or infused, whatever enchant you'd like between healthy, stamina, magicka, prismatic, whatever you feel like you need most in terms of stats. Now for weapon enchant specifically, this is going to vary a little bit depending on what your group wants. So you basically have 4 main enchants that you can choose from. Arguably 5 or 6 depending on who you talk to. So the one that you will pretty much always see on the tank is going to be Crusher. That's going to be really important here, just for the reduction in resistances. Then the other 5 are basically kind of situational. So I have here Absorb Stam on one of my Dual Wield offhand here. Then I have Hardening here. So those are 2 of your potential options. Other options include the Weakening enchant, which reduces basically damage that the boss dishes out, and then you also have your absorb magicka and absorb health. So you can have pretty much any of the 3 primary absorb enchants there. So it's kind of up to you how you want to play around with this. So for example, if you're in a progression style guild and you feel comfortable with your sustain, then you can swap out this absorb stamina glyph for a weakening glyph to reduce the damage your group is taking. If you feel like you don't need additional damage shield here on the front bar, but you can swap this out with a weakening enchant or an absorb health enchant to make sure give you a little bit of additional heal. So you do have a lot of different options when it comes to enchant. So don't go by what I have here, just kind of play around and kind of basically change it up depending on what you feel you need at that specific scenario. Alright, so now let's go ahead and talk about the different sets that you can use to basically replace some of this stuff. So the first set that I'm going to talk about is a set that's actually making a comeback here, and that's going to be Torug's Pact, especially with the backbar changes here, as well as the fact that stronger enchants will actually override weaker enchants. Now, Torug's Pact has come back into play here as a potential very strong debuff set, so basically increases the potency of your enchant. So your Crusher enchant right now without Torug's would be 2108, but with Torug's you'd bump it up to 2740. So that just makes gives your enchants a lot stronger. Basically makes them a lot stronger. So that also affects things like the amount of stamina you get back from an absorb stamina enchant, and the shield that you get from the hardening enchant. So that's a pretty nice set to have. It is a craftable set, so you're actually able to mix and match, fit in, make the pieces that you need in order to kind of finish off your tanking sets. So that's really nice to have, but obviously jewelry is going to be a little bit more difficult to get just because of the scarcity of jewelry upgrading materials. So usually you'll have weapons and body instead of jewelry for Torug's Pact, but if you have the materials available or you have the wealth to purchase the upgrade materials, then you can by all means get jewelry for Torug's Pact. So other sets that you might want to consider taking up, Akaviri Dragonguard is a pretty good support set. It basically reduces the cost of your ultimates by 15%. So your Warhorn normally costs 250 ultimate, but with Akaviri Dragonguard that drops it down to 213. But in terms of the DK Battle Roar passive, it still uses the base 250 cost. So it's really nice to have that there for some increased Warhorn uptime, just because it cuts the amount of ultimate you need to gain by about 10 seconds or so. So basically it cuts It cuts down your wait time between Warhorns from about 60 seconds to about 50 seconds, so that just helps maintain good Warhorn uptime and good major force uptime. So this is a drop set from Eastmarch, so you are able to buy this off of Guild Traders. And this is a heavy armor set, so you don't need to worry about only getting jewelry or something like that. Let's see, another set that you might want to pick up, I think I just skipped over it, is Jailer's Tenacity. So this is a dropped set. It's a heavy armor set from Moonhunter Keep, so you will need to have access to the Wolfhunter DLC pack. When you lose 7,000 or more health in a single attack, you gain major vitality for 5 seconds. It basically increases the healing you receive by 30%. So this is very situationally based. So I like to use it in Cloud Rest or Asylum if I'm a main tank, just because those are instances where you are going to be taking those large hits of damage fairly often, so you have very good uptime on major vitality. That just helps basically makes your healer's job a little bit easier in terms of healing you up. So I like to have Jailer's Tenacity here for those 2 mini trials, but it's definitely not a set that you should go out of your way to farm for, just because of the conditions in order to get that major vitality proc. 7,000 health is actually a pretty large chunk of health there. Let's see, another set here. Plague Doctor is another very classic tanking set here. It's a very selfish tanking set, but it does its job very, very well. So this is a drop set from Deshawn. It's a heavy armor set, so you don't have to worry about only picking up jewelry and weapons. You can pretty much pick up any piece you'd like, except for obviously head and shoulders. So it basically just adds a crap ton of health. So when it's completely golded out, the 5-piece adds 4k additional health. So it's, like I said, it's a very selfish set. It basically bumps your health up by a large margin. Doesn't really provide any sort of group utility. But in those instances where you need the additional health, Plague Doctor is definitely a go-to set. Especially in instances where you might be doing a mini trial. One tank already has Ebon, so you can't really double up on Ebon. So it's just might as well just use Plague Doctor for the additional health there. And I believe that is pretty much it for the different sets that you might be able to consider running on a tank. So in terms of what sets you want to run, just because you typically will have Dual Wield on your backbar or a staff backbar, you can pretty much mix and match wherever you'd like. There's really no restrictions because, as you guys saw, a lot of these sets are heavy armor, so you don't have to worry about only picking up jewelry and weapon pieces. The exception to this is Alkosh, because this is a medium armor set, so you will need to just get the jewelry and the weapons if you are going to be doing Alkosh as one of your primary sets. Other than that, you can just pretty much pick up whatever pieces you get first there for the rest of the sets. Let's go over kind of build information. So I am a Dark Elf here. This is pretty much a carbon copy of my live character on the PTS. So my tank on live is a Dark Elf. If you do truly want to min-max your race, the 2 most common options for races are going to be Argonians and Imperials. Argonians are very strong because they have 5% additional healing received and taken. They have 9% additional max health, and they get additional resources back whenever they drink a potion. So basically each potion is kind of like a tri-potion for Argonians. Imperials, on the other hand, they get 12% max health and 10% max stamina. So the 2 resource pools that are the most important for a tank. So a lot of tanks choose between one of those 2 races when it comes to what race they prefer as a tank. I personally view race as not very important for tanking, so Woler tanks on a Khajiit, Leofa tanks I believe on a Imperial, and I know plenty of tanks that run Argonians. I'm a Dark Elf and I've pretty much tanked almost all the content in the game successfully. The only thing I have yet to clear is Cloud Rest Hard Mode, as of recording of this video I should say. So race doesn't really make that big of an impact on your effectiveness as a tank, and I believe Nefes has actually put out a video on his analysis of which races kind of how they stack up in terms of tanking. So I'll put a link down in the description below so you guys can take a look at that video and decide for yourself what race you would like your tank to be. Now, in terms of attribute points, this is going to vary very much depending on your specific race. So, for instance, I'm a Dark Elf, so I don't have any sort of passive racial bonuses to my health. So if I was an Argonian, I have additional health, so I might not need to put as many points into health as I have here. So the general rule of thumb is you want to hit about 35k health or so, with, you know, food buffs and everything like that. Ebon, if you're not wearing Ebon as a tank. And then from there, you want to invest into stamina and magicka somewhat equally. You'll notice here that my max stamina is higher than my max magicka, and that's kind of the key point here. So I have about 40, I'm really cutting it close here, but I have 40 higher max stamina than max magicka here. And that's just because orbs and shards, again, they only return the highest resource pool between those two. So that's going to be really, really important overall here. Just make sure you have your max stamina bonus is a little bit higher. So for example here, because I'm a dark elf, I have 9% additional max magicka compared to 6% max stamina. So I do need to put a few more points into stamina in order to make up that difference there. I did not change my Munda Stone, so this should actually be the Atronach, is the Munda Stone that I choose, and that is a magicka regen. Actually, let me see if I... No, I don't have it here, but it is the Atronach, so that does boost your magicka regen. So magicka regen is pretty important here. So actually, let me pick it up so you guys can see exactly how much regen you should be getting with the Atronach. Put this down. So with the Atronach, you should be sitting at around 900 magicka regen. So as you can see here, 894. That's just because a lot of your buffing skills come from magicka, use magicka. So you do want some decent magicka regen, but that's not really that big of a deal because most tanks will use balance for magicka regen or deep thoughts. So that's going to be our Atronach, the Munda Stone of choice here. I'm a werewolf just because we're on the PTS, and to get vampire it only comes at level 1, but normally you would be a vampire for the additional magicka regen as well as the undeath passive, which reduces the damage you take. Then we're using purple food here, so this boosts our health, magicka, and stamina. Now, in terms of skills, this is just one particular bar setups combination. I will be going over kind of alternatives for a lot of these different skills once we go over what I have here. So for our front bar, this is a sword and board bar. Pierce armor, heroic slash, fragmented shield, balance, absorb magicka, and temporal guard. Then for our back bar, this is our dual wield bar here. I have inner rage, green dragon blood, blood craze, deadly cloak, and your unrelenting grip. So a lot of these slots are actually what are called flex spots. So for example, deadly cloak, this spot here would be a flex spot. Unrelenting grip is a flex spot. Absorb magic here is a flex spot. So what that basically means is that you have several choices of skills that I'm going to go over in a second, and you can pretty much replace any of those skills with one of those skills on this pretty large list. So that's what I mean when I say it's a flex spot. It's basically a flexible spot that you can pick and choose what skills you want there, depending on you know, the content that you're running and things like that. Now, starting off first here on the Ardent Flame line, Engulfing Flames is a very strong debuff skill. So affected enemies take 10% more damage from fire damage attacks. That's pretty nice to have, especially in mini trials where you pretty much are running all magicka DPS. So most DK tanks will be running Engulfing Flames on one of their bars. So for example, this would be on the back bar here for me. And it's just very, very nice debuff. It's a unique debuff too, so there's no other source of this additional 10% additional damage there. Other options include something like Cauterize for additional heal. It's not a very strong heal, but it's nice to have that there. It can help proc Earthgore. Under the Draconic Power skill line, Choking Talons is your hard CC, so basically roots everything, and also applies minor maim regardless of whether they are rootable or not. So that's nice to have. It's a nice AoE minor maim. Reflective Plate will grant you immunity to snares and immobilizations for 2 seconds, so this is nice to get out of any sort of snares that you might be trapped in. It also helps reduce damage from any projectiles. And then if you need a interruptible, and it's within melee range, you can go with Deep Breath. This is a very nice AoE interrupt. Under the Earth and Heart, Cinderstorm is a very small heal that you can put onto yourself or the group. It helps proc Earthgore, it helps keeps your health up as well. So this is nice to have here. Magma Shell is an ultimate that you might want to consider running instead of Temporal Guard here. That's just because Magma Shell will reduce all incoming damage to 3% of your max health, essentially giving you invulnerability for 11 seconds. You're still taking damage, but it's a very small percentage of damage that you're taking. So it's very nice to have here for progression things, when you might want to run this. So for example, Asylum Hard Mode might be beneficial to have this on the bar while you're progressing through that. Alright, under weapon skill lines, I do want to mention this now, that you can run a destro staff on the back bar, and I'm going to go over this. Actually, I'll go over this right now, why not? So Dual Wield is very nice because you can have 3 enchants up at the same time, but it also comes with some drawbacks, and I covered this in my Dual Wield video for tanks a couple of days ago. But one of the big weaknesses is the lack of Blockade and the lack of ranged interrupt. So in those instances, in those fights where you might need that ranged interrupt, or you want to help out with off-balance uptime with Lightning Blockade, you might want to run an Ice Staff or a Lightning Staff. So in those instances, obviously you can't run Blood Craze or Deadly Cloak. You'd be running something like Elemental Blockade or Crushing Shock instead. So these are 2 options that you want to take into consideration. You definitely want to use it because you need your passives down here if you're running a Destruction Staff backbar. Other options here, Ring of Preservation, or the other morph, I forget what it is, Turn Undead, I believe. This is for the minor protection. It's a very small radius. You can see here it's only 5 meters, so pretty small. So this is more for stacked fights where you need the addition of damage mitigation. The classic examples of when you're going to be using this is going to be against the Mage in Execute and against Assembly General in Falls of Fabrication. So it's a nice skill that you definitely want to pick up here. Under the Sigic Order skill line, instead of balance, because balance does require you to give up some of your health, some tanks like to use Deep Thought instead because it doesn't require that same sort of sacrifice. A lot of tanks like balance though, just because it also gives Major Ward, Major Resolve, so you have sustain and your resistance buffs all in one neat little package there. So if you do run Deep Thoughts, you will need to run something like Hardened Armor up here for your resistance buffs, just because you don't have it, but it is nice to have that there as an option. Under the Undaunted skill tree, Overflowing Altar is a very nice ability to have for the minor lifesteal. Usually it's going to be a healer that's running this. It's typically a Warden healer or Warden off-tank will be running Blood Altar, so you don't have to necessarily worry about it, but you should pick it up just in case you don't have a Warden option. Bone Surge is another nice option to have. It's basically a nice shield. It's a stamina based shield, but you're not really using this so much for the shield as much as for the major vitality bonus that you get. So this basically allows anybody who synergizes with you to grant major vitality to those four people. This is nice to have here. And the final one that I do want to mention here that I don't normally use, but it's something that I do want to kind of mention here, is actually energy orbs. So this is just if you want to give some additional resources to your allies. Like I said, I don't really use it too much because it's fairly expensive to run, but sometimes if you're an off tank and you don't really have anything else to do while you're waiting for the second boss or something to spawn, it's nice to have this option there. Echoing Vigor is a nice option, more for off tanks, less so for main tanks, because it's not a very strong heal, but it is a heal nonetheless, so it's nice to have that there. And then under the support line, Efficient Purge, for those instances where you do have debuffs you need to purge off yourself. Again, it is expensive, but it does the job well, and it's the only real source you have of cleansing debuffs outside from the Purify synergy from the Templar's Extended Ritual, or another healer running Purge instead. I do also want to mention Barrier here as a potential option for your front bar ultimate, just because of the additional magic regen you would get if you have the magic aided passive. The shield is also actually very strong ever since the changes to shields, so this is nice to run in something like 4-man content where they can basically give your allies a enormous shield as well as a heal if you have Reviving Barrier or something like that. So those are all your options when it comes to skills. So again, you will kind of want to mix and match depending on your group, depending on how you feel, what you need for what tools you need for to fit the job there. Now finally, let's go over our champion point. So the CP cap is now 810, which gives us 270 points to put across the nodes however you'd like. Starting off with our green tree, we have 64 in Arcanist and 49 into Tenacity here. And then we have 72 into Shadow Ward, 40 into Tumbling, and 45 into Warlord. So you can kind of mix and match your CPs a little bit here. So for example, you can push Arcanist up to 75 if you'd like. You can push Tenacity up to 64 or 75. It's up to you if you want to do that or not. Generally speaking though, I would try to keep at least 72 points in the Shadow Ward for the block reduction. The next jump point I believe is 81, so that would be your next option there if you want to put some more points into Shadow Ward there. Now for our blue CP tree, this particular setup is kind of centered around if you are a pure tank. If you're not a pure tank, if this character for instance also is your mag DK or your stam DK DPS, then you can just kind of run mag DK or stam DK CPs depending. So for a pure tank build, you will have 75 into Blessed, 81 to Elfborn for the additional heal from Rune Dragonblood. You have 81 points into Precise Strikes for any sort of stamina heal, so that's primarily Vigor. Then you have 31 Mastered Arms, 2 into Physical Weapons Expert. Blue CPs are generally more DPS focused, so the remaining points don't really matter where you put them. So you can push Bless up to 100 and Elfborn up to 100 if you'd like for that last percentage point, if you truly want to maximize your healing done, but it's kind of up to you if you want to do that or not. Finally, for our red CPs, this is a very balanced approach, so we're kind of taking a lot of different mitigation sources into consideration. But depending on the trial, you might want to shift your CP points around to kind of best mitigate the damage you'll be taking as a tank. So I have 66 into Ironclad and Thick-Skinned, and then 64 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. And I have 10 into Quick Recovery here for the Field Physician passive. As a tank, you generally will not be resurrecting too much unless you're like an off tank and you're waiting for your off tank duties to start. So you don't need 10 points here, but it's just nice to have this option. I mean, you're also a tank, so you don't really take that much damage to begin with. So you can put these 10 points elsewhere if you would like, something like, push Ironclad up to 72 and put those 4 points into like Spell Shield or something. It's kind of up to you how you want to do that. Alright, so that's pretty much it for the build information itself. So like I said, there's no real parse to do here, but I do kind of want to show you guys what I'm talking about the Rending Slashes proccing enchants on the back bar here. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make a hardening enchant on the back bar so you guys can see just exactly how it is working. Where is my here it is. I do have an Absorb Stamina enchant on the back bar right now, so if I put this hardening enchant here, so I'm just going to show you guys on this dummy what I'm talking about when I was talking about dual wields being able to proc both enchants when you have Rending Slashes active. So you should be able to see the Crusher debuff active on the skeleton when I use Rending Blood Craze, and you'll also see a shield pop up on me when I have Blood Craze, even when I'm on my back bar. If I go over to my back bar here, you can see that it re-upped itself automatically. So that's really nice to have, and as long as you're keeping that up, you're able to basically maintain nearly 100% uptime on both of these enchants here. And it's not just Blood Craze that does it, I also believe Deadly Cloak does it as well. It's just Deadly Cloak is kind of more bursty, not a continuous dot, so Rending Slash is going to be a little bit better for that purpose. But Deadly Cloak does proc your enchant and also provides you Major Evasion, which reduces the amount of AoE damage you take by 25%, so it's just a nice additional mitigation there if you want that additional mitigation. So that's what I mean when I say having dual wield back bar is very nice to have those two enchants pretty much remain. It's very easy to get the good uptimes on those two enchants there. So that is it for this build video. Let me know down in the comment section below if you guys have any questions or comments about this build. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.